Welcome to the Second Thought podcast. Today's second thought is in response to what a gentleman called Ibrahim Mogra broadcast on Thought for the Day on the 28th of January 2026. This broadcast was on BBC Radio 4, where the Today programme was hitting its stride, and as usual, at 7:45, journalism was paused for 3 minutes so that a priest of some sort could speak. Now, Mogra is a Muslim, an imam based in Leicester. Mogra did not make a catalogue of errors of fact and of logic, and given how common such catalogues are on Thought for the Day, I guess that is a blessing. But, according to the BBC, presenters of Thought for the Day provide reflections from a faith perspective on people and events in the news. Ibrahim didn't even gesture towards his broadcast being in any way topical or related to a person or event in the news. Now, having listened closely to several hundred of these Thought for the Day broadcasts, while he's clearly off brief, I think it's forgivable, perhaps something we should encourage. In my experience, the less directly a Thought for the Day delivery is linked to actual news, the better it is. My working hypothesis is that there is a strong correlation between quality and the amount of time available to prepare. For example, in April 2025, Ephraim Mervis anchored a broadcast on the events of Passover and the 25th anniversary of the Justice Gray ruling in the Deborah Lipstadt libel case that found David Irvin, a historian, to be an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier, among several other very unpleasant things. It remains one of the few good examples of a Thought for the Day broadcast. Tellingly, it did not require Mervis to respond to or even look at that week's news. Both the event of Passover and the anniversary were not about to change course. He likely had the Passover Thought for the Day slot reserved long in advance, as the major Jewish festivals understandably coincide with rabbinical Radio 4 bookings, and he could also be reasonably confident that both Passover and Irvin would feature in some news coverage, not that it really mattered. If the quality is high enough, who cares if it's topical? The BBC doesn't apparently care that Thought for the Day is routinely and objectively terrible. Which presents a good opportunity to recap what this podcast is all about. I really don't like Thought for the Day. My heart sinks every morning when Thought for the Day is introduced. There are balmy claims, comically earnest prayer voices, and the almost inevitable deviations from fact and from logic. If you'd rather not listen to me wang on about the BBC and want to get straight to my thoughts on what Ibrahim Mogra said, please skip ahead by 5 minutes to just after 8 minutes in. If you're happy to stick around, then here goes. I've been a regular listener to the Today programme for a little over half of the 69 years that it's been broadcast each morning from Monday to Saturday. For those not familiar, Today is a BBC Radio 4 news and current affairs programme that is broadcast to the whole nation. It routinely attracts among the finest broadcast journalists in the country, who between them present 3 hours each weekday morning some of the best objective news in the world. Somewhat oddly, it is interrupted every day at around 7:45 for 3 minutes so that a religious person can speak. I am not alone in disliking this incongruous churchy interlude. There were two relatively recent, well-organised efforts, one in 2009 and another in 2018, from humanist organisations with supporting celebrities to have the BBC revise this slot on grounds that by having Thought for the Day presented exclusively by people of faith was counter to the BBC's editorial requirement that demands due impartiality. Both attempts were dismissed. They were dismissed with the argument that it was a religious slot and hence essential that the presenters were religious. In fairness, that logic is foolproof. My objection is different. My objection is on grounds of quality. Persistent and predictable poor quality unbefitting the BBC. Specifically, Thought for the Day routinely broadcast content that is counter to the other overarching tenet of the BBC's editorial guidelines, which requires the BBC to be duly accurate. Thought for the Day routinely falls short of this requirement for accuracy. Worse, it is frequently awash with inaccuracy. Now, somewhat predictably, belief is often presented by religious people as fact. Predictable, perhaps, but intolerable hogwash nonetheless. Far worse is the frequency that false claims and logical errors are made without accountability. And I do not think these false claims and logical errors are accidental. They are deliberately included to deceive, and it seems unlikely that presenters set out to do this. I get the sense they're so used to preaching with total immunity from criticism, they have lost sight of how deceit has been woven into their rhetoric. Is there a priest in the land that is not routinely only preaching to the choir? And I think that's the problem. These errors and deceit all pervert meaning and sense, and they are liberally scattered among a significant majority of Thought for the Day broadcasts. I can count fewer than 20 examples in a year of daily listening that contain no false claims and no failures of reasoning. Hence, I want the BBC to stop such low quality and error-ridden broadcasting. If Thought for the Day really did provide considered, cogent, insightful reflections on the news from a religious perspective, I can see an argument for it having a future of some sort. Now, because of its mandate for impartiality and its funding model, the BBC is the most scrutinised news organisation in the world, which almost certainly contributes to it also being among the most trusted, in fact, the most trusted news organisation in the world. Now, most UK news outlets are politically aligned. Indeed, most are right-leaning, such as the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and the Express. Only two major outlets, the Guardian and the Daily Mirror, are left-leaning. But for the most part, readers, viewers, browsers and listeners get to select the bias they want in their news in advance. And the BBC bucks this trend by actively seeking to be impartial. Which of course means that for an average reader of the Daily Mail or the Daily Telegraph, the BBC looks distinctly left-wing. The other major difference between the BBC and all those other news outlets is that for all practical purposes, residents of the United Kingdom do not have a choice whether or not to pay for the BBC. Hence, much of the above-mentioned scrutiny. Now, unlike the Mail and the Telegraph, the BBC also goes out of its way to be accurate. Corrections are forthright and honest, they're not buried and obsequious. And the BBC is not preaching to the faithful. It's faithful to objectivity, and it manages to do all of this under considerable pressure. Yes, it makes mistakes. All news outlets make mistakes. The BBC is very active in seeking to correct them. Why then is the BBC's religious programming given a free pass for claptrap? The BBC gives religious people a daily platform and allows them to broadcast what is objectively rubbish, deceit, sleight of hand. And don't get me wrong, I also think it's ridiculous to have a sermon jammed into the news as though it were a weather report or a dip into sport or business. But if we absolutely have to have it, we should expect from it exactly the same quality and accuracy as the broadcast news that it interrupts. On which note, back to Ibrahim Mogra and the flaw of his Thought for the Day broadcast. His January Thought for the Day was awful, but for a different set of reasons. It was anodyne, pointless, banal. It was a staggering waste of both airtime and opportunity. Remember that word, waste. It bore no signs at all of preparation. Now, I guess there's a chance that Ibrahim stepped in at the last minute to cover for someone who dropped out. But even so, you'd have thought a professional preacher would have something pretty good in their back pocket for just such occasions. He delivered a sermon on how God cares only for what is in our hearts and not our looks. No pithy relevance, no interesting twist, no modern take, just 3 minutes of tiresome hallmark philosophy. Listen to this.
Someone may look as handsome and beautiful as a prince or princess, but if their heart is filled with hate, anger, jealousy, animosity, greed, miserliness, and revenge, what good is that beauty? To me, that person is ugly. On the other hand, someone may not be as handsome or beautiful, but their heart is filled with love, kindness, respect, friendship, generosity and forgiveness. Now that is a heart of gold. That is truly a beautiful person.
Truly a beautiful person. I'm not sure this bloke realises what he's saying. More on that in a minute. But what a waste. He might as well have just explained for 3 minutes that the world would be a much better place if only we'd all be much nicer to each other. It's puerile twaddle. And this went out live to one of BBC Radio 4's biggest audiences in the middle of a respected news and current affairs show. And he had no excuse. He made no link to the news, leaving himself unshackled by constraints of relevance. He could have said anything. How telling that he chose to say nothing at all. This was not a reflection from a religious perspective. It was nothing but kumbaya platitudes of the highest order. Now, by all means, you should listen to the whole thing on BBC Sounds or read the transcript on secondthoughtfortheday.com. But what came before the above was more sentimental nonsense. 400 words of it in total. 3 minutes that anyone who heard it will never get back. Tell us something we don't know, Ibrahim. Tell us something surprising. Tell us something insightful. Give us the benefit of your perspective and your experience. Now, no one gives a rat's arse how long you spend in front of the mirror or if you moisturize. And yes, he went into both. But people will indulge you if you have something interesting to say. Now, if you haven't, I'm sure the Today producers and presenters will be delighted to fill the gap. Just imagine how many items fail to make the cut for each show. And here Ibrahim is squandering a priceless opportunity with nothing more than Sunday school drivel. And quite frankly, it is insulting. Worse, while making grossly improbable claims of his own virtues, he reinforced conflation of morality and aesthetics, of goodness with beauty. Listen to this again.
But their heart is filled with love, kindness, respect, friendship, generosity and forgiveness. Now that is a heart of gold. That is truly a beautiful person.
Doesn't he see that he's making this worse? No, this isn't a beautiful person by any normal use of the phrase. It is a good person, perhaps a decent person. Perhaps by his reckoning they have a beautiful soul. But what Ibrahim said is as backward as it is lazy, and it's supporting the very effect that he is apparently seeking to criticize. That we load too much value on looks. It's easy to avoid. You can make exactly the same point with book covers instead of beauty. But his conflation was made repeatedly, directly as we just heard, but also obliquely, with the inference that princes and princesses are beautiful. Although I'm guessing that Mogra has paid little attention to the physical appearance of actual princes and princesses. Monarchical families are an excellent advert for the perils of inbreeding, and for an example, just run an image search for the Habsburg chin. And who the hell did he think he was informing? I mean, maybe does he think that 10-year-olds haven't worked out that beauty isn't an entirely reliable sign of general goodness, and that books should not be judged by their covers? And yet those very same 10-year-olds already suspect that publishers know covers matter. There's something really interesting in here, and it's not difficult to find. Unless, apparently, you're called Ibrahim Mogra. So let's get into it a bit. With thousands of choices and a premium on time, human brains evolved the use of heuristics to make all sorts of decisions, including book purchase decisions and goodness of people decisions. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that were once obviously essential for our survival. Today, they remain essential, but to avoid being paralyzed by analysis, doubt, and mental exhaustion, as opposed to avoid being eaten. Our brains evolved to be energy efficient and to react quickly and to make workable decisions, not necessarily correct decisions. The heuristics that result were frequently illogical and they are rarely precise, but they explain a great deal about how we engage with the world in which we live. One of these evolved mental shortcuts is to equate attractiveness with health, youth, and fertility. We have to consciously reject our brain's default behavior to make a more considered judgment of someone's goodness or otherwise. Frowning at someone for not looking more than skin deep is like being disappointed that the Pope is Catholic, and framing all that frowning in religious context while not exploring what is actually going on is arrogant and obnoxiously judgmental. Ibrahim raises an infinitely interesting subject and then fails even to scratch its surface. He clearly had no intention to say anything interesting. Next time, Ibrahim, perhaps, assuming you don't have the gumption to hand proceedings back to the Today programme, please give the listeners something to think about. Except, alas, next time just happened. It was on Saturday the 7th of February, and it was more of the same. He did it again. No reflections on people or events in the news. No reflections at all. Nothing novel, nothing interesting, and nothing useful. He wasted 3 minutes this time telling us not to waste food. Well, Ibrahim, thank you. What an insight. It's like he's preparing public information announcements for some medieval version of the Boys Brigade. What is he going to run with next? Will we be encouraged to teach homeless people to fish so that they will never again be short of a meal? Or perhaps he'll reinforce the importance of writing thank you letters for birthday presents. Listen to this.
I think of all the restaurants and hotels and the amount of food that ends up in the bins every day. This happens throughout the world. All that food, good food, posh food, sometimes untouched food, wasted. Here's what I will do. I will dish out only what I know I can finish on my plate. Better still, I should dish out a little less, because I can always have a second helping if I need more.
He did, though, slip up. Perhaps by mistake he allowed something of modest interest to escape. He explained that in the Quran, a prophet describes wasteful people as siblings of Satan.
I read the Quran every day. It warns me not to be wasteful. Eat and drink, but don't waste, it says. It describes wasteful people as brothers and sisters of Satan. Now I know that may sound a bit harsh, but it's to underline a point.
A bit harsh? You don't say, Ibrahim. Pray tell, how do you feel the misdeeds of murderers should be underlined? Given that Mogra's religion has notoriously violent factions at some of its extremities, this might put the willies up anyone about to scrape into the bin the food that their children just refused. Let us, though, take him at his word and the words of his prophet. People who waste should be regarded as the brothers and sisters of Satan. Hoisted by your own petard, Ibrahim, you have twice in 3 weeks wasted an incredible opportunity to broadcast something valuable, meaningful, or insightful to a nation of news radio listeners. You instead chose to broadcast empty, platitudinous nursery stories. The wastrel here is you, Ibrahim. Is it then your contention that we should regard you as no better than a brother of Satan? Reflection doesn't really appear to be your thing, Ibrahim Mogra, but do please reflect on that. Thank you for listening to the Second Thought podcast. For scripts, for notes and transcripts of the BBC broadcasts, please visit secondthoughtfortheday.com. Until next time.